And welcome back to another episode of the official Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club podcast, bringing you all the latest news, updates, and buzz surrounding your mighty Jackson State Tigers. I am the Corey C. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast to be notified of all future episodes. Apple Podcast and Spotify video users, rate and review the show. And everyone, go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. It all helps the cause, which is the I love Jackson State University. And today we are joined by a special guest. He is no stranger to Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. Whenever we call on him, he's right there, always willing and ready to share his knowledge of our upcoming opponent, Tennessee State, in the Southern Heritage Classic. Of course, he is the great Mike Organ of The Tennessean, who is approaching 40 years at the publication. So first of all, congratulations on an amazing tenure.
Thanks, Corey. Glad to be back with you.
All right. So obviously the big one. All right. We both teams, both fan bases circle this game on their calendar every single season. In the past couple seasons, that hype has increased to another level just with the star power on the sidelines in terms of the head coaches. We'll get to that in a second, but I definitely want to get your thoughts on this team. But first, let's just preview, or let's just go back and take a look at your season opening loss to Eastern Washington. Put forth a great effort, but the team came up a little bit short. So what are your quick thoughts on that game?
Well, I thought I was impressed by the way the offense came out strong. I mean, you come out with a 67-yard touchdown on your first play, but they kept it up after that. I mean, that might have been a little bit of a fluke, that very first play, but they kept it up and continued to play well into the second quarter. There was a lull, however, toward halftime that spilled over into the third quarter that they just weren't able to overcome the rest of the way, and that was disappointing for them because it was an offensive lull. It was a couple of turnovers on back-to-back possessions and some really silly penalties, 4 over a span of 5 plays at one stretch. And these are things that Eddie George has determined that he's going to clean up with the discipline that he's trying to instill in this team. And that was a big fallback there, and it cost them the game. They were not able to come back. As you mentioned, they gave Eastern Washington a scare, and the game ended with an interception at the Eastern Washington 10-yard line. So they were threatening, Tennessee State was, to tie or win the game on a 2-point conversion. But that middle part of the game, it was disappointing, and they can't have that against Jackson State. Last year we saw that when Dion was just first putting this team together, and they had a lull in the second half, and Jackson State put up 4 touchdowns on them. So this week it's going to take a complete 4 quarters.
Right. You mentioned that lull in the middle of the game, second and third quarter, not able to put any points on the board. But despite that, definitely some bright spots for the team offensively. Racked up 547 yards total offense, 290 on the ground, and then another 257 through the air, averaging 6.8 yards per play, and even outgaining Eastern Washington. And then TCU, from a defensive standpoint, limited Eastern Washington to 126 yards on the ground. So that has to be something that Coach George can build upon.
Yeah, definitely. Coming out of last season, he liked the balance. He wanted balance on this team. Obviously, any Eddie George coach team is going to run the ball well, but he wanted equal balance of run and pass. But he felt like they were too slow last year in terms of get the playoff. So he sped up the pace. Spent the spring installing a new offense that no huddle and picking up the pace. So everybody was, including Eddie George, was eager to see how that offense performed. And you mentioned the balance. It was still there, and it was more productive than it was at any point last season. So they were happy about that. And again, the only problems was the penalties. Last year, they started the season with 18 penalties, 150 yards. This year, they start 12 penalties, 95 yards. He definitely was disappointed in that because they had gotten better throughout the course of last season with their penalties and their mistakes, and that was a setback there. And it turned out to be a setback they couldn't overcome.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about that balance, starting with the quarterback. Tennessee State is led by Austin P transfer Draylon Ellis. And fun fact, he is a junior from Olive Branch, Mississippi. So he is from the SIP. I'm pretty sure he'll have a lot of fans in the stands for that game. Obviously, not far. I mean, Olive Branch and Memphis pretty much, they're just right on the border of each other. So not far drive. But he beat out Auburn transfer Shaheel Garnett, who actually started the game in the SEC last season for Auburn. So that's impressive. So how was that camp battle? And does Ellis seem to have maybe solidified himself as the starter?
Oh yeah, it wasn't much of a battle when
Okay.
when Draylon showed up. Pretty much everybody knew. Eddie didn't come out and say it. He said there was a battle going on, but everybody knew that it was going to be Draylon Ellis. That he came here with the idea that he was going to be the starter. He'd already proven himself, thrown for over 3,800 yards in 2 seasons at Austin P. Was the OVC newcomer of the year, co-newcomer of the year, and OVC all OVC second team quarterback last year. So for the first time in, I would say, 10 years, this offense came in knowing who its quarterback was and with confidence in that quarterback. They've come in with returning starters before, but not quarterbacks that they had confidence in. And so for the first time since Mike German was here in 2012, this offense came in knowing that Draylon Ellis was a quarterback and with confidence in that quarterback.
And from the running back position, obviously a familiar name, Devon Starling. He led all TSU rushers again in yardage, 207 yards on the ground, had a touchdown, 8.3 yards per carry. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think he'll probably be the toughest running back that we, Jackson State, will face all season. And between him and your quarterback, a lot of observers will probably say that if you can stop those two, you can stop Tennessee State. But that's much easier said than done. So just talk about the importance of those two.
Well, you mentioned fun fact. Another fun fact, Draylon Ellis shared the OVC Newcomer of the Year award 2 years ago with Devon Starling, the running back that you mentioned. Devon lost his starting position in the preseason camp. He was been the leading rusher for the last 2 years, had 1,400 yards rushing combined over the last 2 years, and came and injured his shoulder last year and had to go undergo surgery in the offseason. So he missed spring practice. And he maintained his starting position coming out of spring. His number, he was at the top of the depth chart. And I think he thought to himself, well, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to be the starter. So he came into preseason camp with that mindset, and that wasn't the mindset of the coaching staff. They demoted him to second team. And I'm not so sure he was at third team. They never really said this, but Mike Mitchell, a running back from Temple, had a better camp than Devon did. So he was down. Now, he was the first running back off the bench against Eastern Washington, and he came in on the third series, and you can see that the staff had definitely gotten his attention because he came in strong. I think he ran for 7 yards on his first carry and ended up having, I believe, 4 carries for over 20 yards, a long touchdown, and as you mentioned, a career best 207 yards, I think, on 25 carries. So whatever they did, they got his attention, and Jackson State will have to pay for that a little bit because he'll come in strong for this game. Plus, he played in this game last year, so he knows how tough it is.
And from the first game, from the looks of it, 2 other names that Jackson State will have to watch out for are at the wide receiver position, Cam Weiss and also Zach Dobson. They seem to be Ellis's primary targets, both big playability and can take it to the house. I know you mentioned that first touchdown, but they both had 60-plus yard TDs, mostly on yards after the catch. So just talk about that wide receiver room as well.
Yeah, all of Zach's were basically on a yak because the touchdown was a shuffle pass. So he went the whole way, 67 yards running. But, you mentioned his primary targets, and they were in that first game. But we all thought that going in, J.J. Holloman would be his primary target. J.J. Holloman is a transfer from he played 1 year at Florida International, FIU, but he would have been Georgia's leading receiver had he returned for his junior year 2 years ago. He is a stud. Eddie George calls him a grown man. He looks different than the other players on this team. He's developed and just a skilled player. And we were surprised. And apparently Eastern Washington knew something, because I think they targeted him on defense and doubled him a little bit. I don't even think he had but one pass
Right.
thrown to him, maybe two.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you'll probably see the offense do some things to try to get him the ball this week, along with the other two that you mentioned. Cam Weiss looked great. Zach Dobson looked great. So you'll want to watch those three, and you'll want to watch the tight end, Josh Trueheart, because Ellis likes to throw to his tight end, does a lot of play action. So I think we'll see more of that. I think Trueheart only had one catch, but you'll see more of the tight end in play this week, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And switching over to the defensive side of the ball, I think the leader for the TSU defense going into the season was probably expected to be James Green, the linebacker, all conference honors, led the team in tackles last season. Think about 77 tackles. Now, he didn't play last week due to an injury. So, any update on his status, and what is the team missing without his presence?
All Eddie said is that we're completely healthy. So that would indicate that James Green will be back, but that specifically, he hasn't said that. Now, what he could have been talking about was the fact that they lost 6 players during this game. To Darius Patterson, to Ray Jones, J.J. McClendon, Joshua Bryant, and Devon Hawkins. And they got everybody back except for Hawkins came back and was ejected for a targeting call. And Jayshon Bryant didn't come back, and McClendon didn't come back. But Eddie said yesterday that we're healthy and everybody will be back. Saw a big drop off in that first game. Obviously, when you lose 6 starters like that, and you're already missing your leading tackler from last year. So the defense came out looking very good, looking like it did at times last year, when it surprised a lot of people by how good it was last year, and played well until they started losing players. A couple of those that we believe were just first game of the year, cramps, issues, that kind of thing. Is a day game, 86 degrees, I think, when it kicked off. So that could have been the issue there, but no long-term injuries for the others. It was a defense that, last year it surpassed the offense. We all thought the offense would be ahead of the defense, but under the defense coordinator, Brandon Fisher, who's the son of former Titans coach Jeff Fisher, really surprised a lot of people and played really well in spots, in long stretches, actually. TSU put together a 4-game winning streak last year, and the defense was mostly responsible for that. This defense, Brandon Fisher was able to do that with what he told me with 12 or 13 starters. That sounds okay since you only play 11, but you got to have some depth.
Mm-hmm.
So he did that with no depth last year. And he's told me that with the Eddie brought in about 20 transfers, and many of them, most of them were defensive players. So he helped the defense out a lot. And Brandon's told me that he's probably in the range of 20 to 22 starters now. So the defense is better, and as long as none of those injuries are nagging or enough to cause anybody miss playing time, they should be pretty good going into this game.
Mm-hmm. And are there any guys in particular who you would expect to probably step up, especially in the absence of a James Green? I know, to have 2 big D tackles up front, to Ray Jones and to Darius Patterson, it make life difficult for the offensive linemen. Both those guys receive all conference honors. So are those 2 probably the 2 biggest names that will need to step up?
Yeah, both of those 2, but the one to really keep an eye on is Kayvon Pope, who replaced Green. Kayvon Pope is a transfer from Ohio State, Eddie's school, and played really well until he got thrown out for targeting last week. So and thrown out early, that was another big loss for Tennessee State. We heard a lot about Kayvon in the camp, and he lived up to it at the early part of this game. But those 3 that you mentioned, along with Jayshon Bryant, who's just a beast on defense for them, the captain, and it just is so injury prone. Keep an eye on those 4.
Mm-hmm. And then we talked about some of the bright spots from that EWU game earlier, but one of the areas of concern has to be the secondary of Tennessee State, giving up 348 yards in the air. How much of a concern is the secondary for Coach George?
Absolutely the number one concern, biggest key in this game. They got no pressure. The secondary looked bad because of, as you pointed out, but much of that was they just didn't get any pressure on the quarterback. They did early, before the players started getting hurt. But when
Okay.
those players started getting hurt, they got no pressure on the quarterback whatsoever. This was a quarterback making his first start, backed up the Walter Payton Award winner last year, so he didn't play much last year, hasn't played much in his career. And he absolutely just picked Tennessee State apart in the secondary, but because he had so much time. That can't happen in this game. They can't let Sanders have that kind of time. They did last year, especially in the second half, and he put up 4 touchdowns on them.
Mm-hmm.
So the secondary was, it looked bad on paper, but a lot of that had to do with just letting the quarterback sit in the pocket. I mean, he just sat back there, wasn't very mobile, and he just sit there and wait for somebody to get open.
Mm-hmm. So 8 Tennessee State players were selected to the 2022 All OVC preseason team, and your publication, The Tennessean, picked TCU to finish 3rd in the OVC. So what did you like about this team that led to that prediction?
Well, one of the things we hinged it on was that the offense would be better. That speeding it up was a good idea. Getting out of the huddle was a good idea, but it hadn't proven itself yet. So that's why there was a little bit of hesitation on picking them that high. But after seeing the offense and how well it played, how it clicked in that first game until it started making some silly penalties, it reverted back to making bad penalties like it did last year, and a couple of back-to-back turnovers. We thought that that was the key, and that's what happened. Is the offense was much improved. The defense played well again, and again, like I said, until the injuries hurt them. So that was the reason we felt like the Tennessee State would probably finish in the top half and maybe give the returning champ UT Martin some trouble.
Mm-hmm. And just talk about your thoughts on this Jackson State team. Obviously, you don't cover Jackson State, don't cover the SWAC. Technically, you don't cover Tennessee State, at least not as the beat writer. But I know you have a pulse on what's going on, and I think everyone kind of around the country kind of saw that score from that Jackson State FAMU game, even if they didn't tune in. So just kind of what's the buzz? What's your perspective on this team that is much improved from last season?
Yeah, it didn't surprise anybody from Tennessee State what they did at FAMU, and this thing has flip flopped. Tennessee State dominated the series for a long time in the Southern Heritage Classic, and it's gone completely the other way. What Dion has done has been amazing. He and Eddie have gone about their building process, building of a program in completely different ways. I talked to Eddie about that yesterday. Dion has done it high profile with a lot of flash, and Eddie's done it kind of more under the radar, but still trying to get there. But Dion has gotten there in such a hurry that it's got Tennessee State as the underdog now, trying to get back to where it was. And what Eddie's done has worked with his way, and he's brought in a lot more talent, and he's developed a lot of players. So, I still see Jackson State as, head and shoulders above Tennessee State, but not to the point where I don't think that Tennessee State couldn't pull an upset.
Right. So, we talk about Jackson State being a much improved ball club and Tennessee State as well. But I think one thing that, probably goes unnoticed is just the growth and progression for a head coach, especially one going from their first year ever coaching into their second year. And I'm talking about Coach Eddie George. So what have you seen from him from a growth and progression standpoint? Any differences in, his comfortability, his demeanor, or his approach in year 2?
Well, the smart thing Eddie did was that he surrounded himself with a staff that had eons of experience. Hugh Jackson was his offensive coordinator last year. Of course, he's now the head coach at Grambling, and he just he got to surround himself, and he was also open to listen to his coaches.
Okay.
He didn't rule with a sledgehammer. He listened to them. The things they suggested. He didn't do everything they suggested, but he'd listen. He also had Jeff Fisher last year on his staff as a senior advisor. Jeff is now in the USFL, but he's there at every game and a couple of practices each week. So he's still around. And I think that's one of the smart things that Eddie's done. He's not let his ego get in his way of listening to his assistants and anybody else who is willing to offer him some advice. So I think that Eddie's developed some confidence because, as you said, it never coached before. Had been around football, of course, all his life, and a lot of coaches, but it never coached before. And it's completely different when you put that whistle around your neck. So I just think he matured in that way and gained a lot of confidence and is still learning, but at least has a year now to fall back on.
Sure, sure. And you mentioned Coach Hugh Jackson. Obviously, he's moved on to Grambling. He became the head coach over there. I would imagine that's a big loss for you guys, just specifically in terms of his experience and then his notoriety, which always helps with recruiting. I mean, he's doing some great things from a recruiting standpoint over at Grambling, bringing in some big names, and he's all over on the West Coast bringing in kids. So let's talk about that transition for Tennessee State to a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, Theron Hatch took over and very upscale, high high energy. His offensive line coach is even more higher energy than he is. So it's a little bit more upbeat than Hugh was last year. Hugh had a pro style offense. This is more of a college style offense, which was needed that we felt like. Obviously, Eddie felt like, and that's why he sped up the pace a lot. Doesn't go in the huddle hardly at all anymore. And that's what Hatch had done at Arizona, where he was wide receivers coach, and in his time as a coordinator in the past. So it's a little bit different offense. It moves a lot quicker, and it keeps the defense off pace far more than the last year's unit did.
Sure thing, sure thing. And obviously the elephant in the room, this is the final game of the Southern Heritage Classic, at least for now. Right, final
Yeah.
game. There was some controversy behind it. We don't have to get into that, but just your thoughts, your personal thoughts on this series. I mean, you've been right there, in covering Tennessee State or Nashville, so you understand the history behind this series and maybe the economic impact on the community and just the fact that it's ending. What are your personal thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm a traditionalist, so I like to see things keep going on. But Eddie talked about this yesterday, and he said, if one in business, and Eddie's a business major, he said if one side feels like they're not getting out of the product what they want, then they need to move on. So he said he understands it from a business side. Tennessee State, as of now, will remain in the Classic. Not sure who the opponent will be going forward, or if it will continue on. I'm just not sure. But I'm sad to see it end because there was a good series. I feel like both teams are high-profile HBCUs. Good to see them play. I'm hoping that Eddie and Dion will find a way to get to play again in the future. And get the series going again, even if it's just a home and home every few years. But I'd like to see that. It's a spectacle, 100 to 200,000 people surrounding the stadium going in. I know Memphis is going to want to keep this going. And so I think they'll do everything they can to find a worthy opponent and keep it going.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are looking forward to a big game, obviously, in its finale. Coach George, Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, obviously a lot of star power, a lot of eyes will be on this game. Huge for HBCUs, and we should anticipate a great time and great atmosphere as always. Mike, again, we appreciate your time. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're right here with Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. Yet again, I hope this series continues not only for the game itself, but for the honor of speaking with Mike Organ to preview the game in the future.
Corey, thanks for having me. I always enjoy being on here with you.
All right. Take care. All right. All right. And that'll do it for this episode of Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. Thank you to all of our listeners. And again, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcast users, Spotify video users. Make sure you rate and review the show. Everyone go follow Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club on Facebook and Tiger Talk 1400 on Instagram and Twitter. We are looking to do some big things with this platform to aid the athletics department. And it all starts with you downloading, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. And tell every Tiger that you know. We're on all podcast outlets, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Video, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and so on. And we'll be posting each episode on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Everyone, thanks for joining. I love. Go Tigers.